Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, Insights in Minutes, Smart Data Discovery, Automated Data Blending, and Self-Service Holistic Insights. Today, we have Scott Anderson speaking. And take it away, Scott.
Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for the introduction. I will look forward to presenting today on several topics along ClearStory, the background of the company and the platform and application that we've built, some use cases that our customers are engaging with and using ClearStory to drive insight generation. And then we're actually going to get in live and have a demonstration in the product itself. So stick around to see that. And if you do have any questions during the process, please do post them in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll see if we can get any of those answered in the flow of the conversation here. And certainly we'll follow up with you with any continued follow-up after the webinar itself. It is being recorded, so we will also share that with you. So today, why ClearStory, right? And why did we set out to build this solution that we have built? And we've seen a common pattern in some of our team members and their backgrounds coming from big data backgrounds to consumer-facing applications, that there's still a need for the ability to deliver business users a capability to ask and answer more questions, right? The level of questions that they're asking, they're up-leveling their own capabilities and are being more inquisitive. They're asking tougher questions of the data, and to do that, they need solutions that keep up with them, whether that's the size of the data that they're dealing with, whether that's the speed at which they're asking questions, or that the speed at which the data is changing, or the fact that data might exist in so many places across the enterprise or even outside of the enterprise. So it's no longer this notion that IT is perhaps servicing us with all of the data that we need to answer the questions. We might be reaching outside to external syndicated data resources, and there's then a challenge around where should we provide that data for the purposes of driving analyses. We still need to then harmonize and blend that data with some of our internal data feeds. And as we've leveraged in the enterprise newer emerging technology trends such as Hadoop data ecosystems, this growing landscape is one that has perhaps grown a little faster from respect to where the data is coming from and where we're looking to source that information, and has exceeded some of the capabilities of the traditional approaches to then working with the data to produce these insights and satisfy the business stakeholders. So we definitely see a commonality across organizations, across verticals, and across use cases where the traditional approach is too manual, it's too slow, it doesn't scale, whether we're speaking about the size of data, the speed at which it's updating, or the number of different data sources that we're trying to orchestrate together. So the approach here that ClearStory is really leading the charge in driving innovation is one around leveraging as much automation as we can in this process. As technology is improving, and on this analytical front, we really feel that there's a continued room for enhancement and advancement in the automation of some of these steps in the overall process of going from your data, wherever it sits, to then your business stakeholders in several different areas along the way. As we automate more and more of these processes, we're unlocking the capabilities of this business users to be asking more questions, to spend more time digging into those harder questions, and to continue to gain that competitive edge and retain your position in the marketplace. So ClearStory want to demonstrate and discuss how, in the various steps of this process, ClearStory has built solutions and aspects of the overall solution that address the different stages of this overall process and pipeline. Starting with connecting to discrete different data sources, whether they're behind the firewall, whether they're out in the cloud, whether they are relational databases, whether they are then working with the Hadoop data structures, etc. So as we go from this traditional landscape here of the structured, semi-structured, world of the business into then this new universe where we're now automating these pipelines, we're able to streamline the delivery of information from each of these different sources and then get it out to those business users' hands. ClearStory's approach to this is one where we begin with an automation of the data discovery step. So from connecting to those particular data sources to then developing a lot of metadata and additional intelligence around what is in these data sources such that we can speed along very traditionally tedious and time-consuming processes of then blending those different data sets together. Now, the act of blending data together, one that benefits from a machine approach where at scale, we're driving information and decisions off of that metadata enrichment, that data inference process, then lands us into a storing environment where we're very hands-on and interactive with the data, with the visualizations that we're creating and the preparation of different data elements for different users so that we can be in and out the different data sets very quickly for this insight generation process. And after we've built out this work product inside of our stories, we're then sharing this information quite broadly in a storyboard where we're then enabling classes of business users that are more traditional consumers of insights to be unlocked and exploring their own ecosystem of connected storyboards where the machine, again, because of its knowledge of the individual elements of the data and this inference process, is able to surface up to business users that they're looking at a certain insight in one view, but in fact, we see that there's other data related to that insight in a different view contained in another storyboard. So we'll actually link you through to those new views. And we're going to show you a taste of all of these different areas in the actual demonstration itself. But before we do that, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about a couple of customer use cases, and then we'll go into a little more granular detail of each step of that process and how we bring the machines to bear to really speed along and automate in many of those steps along the way. So the first use case here that I wanted to talk about is a retail mass market company. They have thousands of stores across the country. And the specific challenge that they had here was struggling to understand their customers and the churn that they were dealing with here. They were having a lot of trouble diagnosing this churn scenario with their customer base. Weren't sure whether or not it was due to certain market conditions, their competition in the market, or just performance at the employee level. And the experience that they were living in, and that before ClearStory came to provide the solution, was one where they had static reports. Some of these reports were updating at a monthly level. The reports themselves, this static manner and they were delivered, led them to a always rearward looking, a late speed to get to the diagnosis of any particular issue at any particular time. And this was really exacerbated then during these high seasons, holiday seasons, etc., where they weren't able to keep up with any of the particular trends in these locations. So they were really moving away from now a static view of things to a really frequently updating, scaled out approach where, as we've connected to the different data sources, and then the automation of that data pipeline is now delivering these store managers and individual stakeholders, these employees in the stores themselves, daily detailed information where they're able to track at a very granular level what is fulfilled, what is not, and able to really match more appropriately their labor outputs at each individual store location that they're operating there. This then unlocks the analysts to go back and to dig into deeper other analyses, right, whenever they're able to offload some of this into the hands of the actual operators at these particular stores. Second use case, one which we'll kind of talk on a little bit actually in the demonstration later on here in the webinar, is an example of one of the world's largest global baked goods manufacturers. This organization has operations all across the world, And they also touch in both the food service and the consumer category. When you're walking down the grocery aisle and some of the white labeled goods that are available there. And they were trying to really take a holistic look across their entire supply chain and their entire product portfolio, looking at trying to optimize growth and really having to get down to that SKU level and understanding what are certain trends in each business unit, the consumer and food service line, and how can they rationalize some of the behaviors that they were seeing there. So a very long-tail distribution of products, and really trying to get to that Pareto understanding of what is selling and where, so that they can streamline their organization. So the effort that ClearStory is now running for them is this automating and blending of their internal data. They then receive POS data from their partners, the various partner networks in this white labeled framework that they work in, as well as then bringing in third-party data from the likes of IRI, Nielsen, to then have that market-wide view of their competition and their position in that marketplace. So the outputs that ClearStory is generating, the audiences that we're landing this information into, we're sharing this now across entire sales teams, marketing groups, the actual customers of their partner framework, and then of course the executive teams. And you can have different views for each of these different audiences. We'll kind of show you some of that in the demonstration as we get down to it. And the net is that they are then making more timely decisions around what products to add and remove from the overall offering based upon the targeted segmentation of their consumer markets that has really been beneficial to their brand growth. So coming back to the capabilities that ClearStory is leveraging to bring value in these particular use cases and across different customer segments, across different verticals, is several sets of technologies. And we'll start to break down these in a little more detail here in the next few minutes. But to summarize, right, as we move from left to right, the data is on the left side, the users are on the right side of the screen here, and ClearStory is this piece in the middle that is handling the vast majority of all the steps it takes to get from data to the discovery of these insights. And it's one that there's a lot of complexity in the details of how this operates. We'll go into that detail. At the same time, there's still then a governance applied to everything that we're doing here. So when we are running this inference to learn about the data and then harmonizing the data and then discovering information within these data sets, it's all subject to a permission model and to a framework that fits within the enterprise landscape around making sure that only the right people see what they should be seeing at the right time, etc. As opposed to other solutions where we are just a visualization solution, right? And it's then left to a very IT-centric management process of making sure that the database permissions are up to date, etc. So we want to streamline the delivery of this information as it gets into these users' hands, then try to make it as highly interactive as possible so that they're not just consuming that static report where they know what data was there, they know that it hasn't refreshed lately, and so they stop going to look for it, but instead are engaging with their stories, with their storyboards. And it's a collaborative experience here where now, as they're able to explore across different elements within the storyboards, they're connecting with not only the different data fields, but themselves and the other user populations inside of the solution, so that it's a better transfer of knowledge is occurring, not just from the visualizations to the users, but from user to user, in deepening the understanding that the use case is presenting. So to break down then some of these tasks here, right? If we look at some of the particular tedious elements of data pipelines and processing, it begins with the very first step of being able to have an understanding of what type of data is present, and then looking at the granular details of these particular data sets and building out these metadata layers that then when we move into the step of harmonizing data, we're actually able to see at scale across any of these different data sources and data sets, where do we share any commonalities, where are our join keys, and then suggest to the user that we should join on those. This further lends itself into nice presentations of overviews of data characteristics where we can see correlations across individual fields within and across multiple data sets. The user experience on the consumer side, on the visualization side of it, is one where we're really trying to again emphasize the interactive component of these particular stories, and then the scaled out dissemination of information in the storyboards, where you'll see in the moment in the demonstration, there's a element of smart exploration that the machine is driving for us around showing us where we do have different data points in common with other analyses. So before we jump into the demonstration here, to break down each of these technologies, the very first step of looking at the data inference process. So here's where we are performing some semantic recognition of the data types that are here, the granularity of the data that exists, the format of that data, and determining are there any hierarchies that we can surface, and the idea of custom categories, so that we can absorb all this information associated with each particular data set, and then this is used in some downstream steps. Now, an example of granularity determination, say on a location or time, we see, right, what is the lowest level of grain? We'll then handle the automatic aggregation of those higher levels, so that if you're working with multiple data sets that exist at different levels of grain, we can automatically bridge between those two without any end user interaction. And when there are those custom categories, to bring in those definitions on those data sets to create then the bridge scenario between those two as different elements within the organization, we can achieve that as well. Now, after we've undergone this inference process where we are generating all of this metadata, this is then driving the intelligence behind the data harmonization process. You see in the screenshot here, we're joining and generating a score where we're able to see where do we share commonalities across any particular data sets. This is a dynamic process, as any data sets are already working together in our story, and we continue to add a third, a fourth, a fifth data set. The scoring and the observation, the intelligence around where those join keys continue to exist is one that is constantly being updated, and allows for us to be freed from the traditional rigid confines of a predefined schema. Because now, as we need to add new data, we can easily do that on the fly, benefit from the machine, figuring out where any of these relationships exist, and then approve or reject any of those considerations. Now, when you've picked all the data, right, where we're at this point of having included all the data into our story environment, there's then often an overwhelming amount of information of different fields that are involved in these joint data sets. If you're coming up to speed in analysis, you're new to the data, or we're looking for some insights that we've never tried to address before, oftentimes that process of just getting started and knowing where to look for relationships within the data sets is one that is often fraught with a lot of tedious processes where we're comparing multiple fields, one field to another or another to another. Here we're providing a mechanism by which the machine will automatically run these profiles, these stats computations, and then share a lot of statistical information, distributions, distinctness, completeness, etc., sparsity of these different elements within each data set across that overall harmonized corpus of data, so that you can then select several fields together and say, now I wish to look at these in a greater detail, and continue to build out some visualizations and really break down that use case. Here, starting at a high level, being able to then see the broad picture before you then focus your efforts. Now, we continually emphasize this concept of a story here. So that active data discovery, the active harmonization, takes place inside of the story. And after we've really arrived at what is the sets of data that are of interest for a particular use case, we're now building out the visualization element also within this story environment here. So the story is where we're going to achieve that harmonization, it's where we're going to then bring in other users into the environment, working together as we build out the analysis. So you can have your business analyst in lockstep with the subject matter expert or with the owner of the data sets themselves, so that we have direct line of sight as to what's being done, and we're avoiding those miscommunications whenever one user, the database admin's in their database, and a business analyst is in a visualization tool, and a subject matter expert is working in a script somewhere. That we want to bring all these users together so that we eliminate a lot of the crosstalk and a lot of the missed opportunities and the slowdowns that happen when we are all working separately in our own siloed tools. Now, that work process that I talked about of streamlining interactions between those different individuals eventually reaches a point where we have the fruitful insights, we have information that we wish to now disseminate broadly to other members of the organization, that if they were not so hands-on and in the story with us, they now have their own mechanism to absorb all the information that we've curated for them via the mechanism of a storyboard. Now, we could have many different storyboards with different use case focuses, different audiences in each. We could have an executive summary storyboard. We could have a storyboard for an entire sales organization where when individual users log in, they're seeing the details relevant to them, and it's been filtered down to their specific views, their customers, etc. Or share a storyboard with your external partner, client, framework, distributors, etc. So it's a far-reaching paradigm where the goal of it is to be able to communicate a lot of information in a very clean, straightforward manner, but then also allow for a level of interactivity and in-depth experience or contextual experience that is often not offered by traditional dashboard approaches. You really see this in action when we get into the storyboard. There's a lot of collaboration, there's commenting within each particular data element that isn't just a chat box, but rather it's contextual. As we click on comments, we're shown the view that that other user was looking at. So now when you are that subject matter expert, or you're the owner, the curator of this environment, and you deliver these insights to groups of users, when they have any questions, they're not responding out of context, but rather they're sharing their experience with you. You're able to see it, respond in kind, as well as very quickly and easily iterate upon this environment whenever those questions push you beyond what is the here and now of what we've shown, and we're looking at some new information and growing at that resource. The last piece of this is that as we've curated these different storyboards, we could have a storyboard that is a high-level summary of the enterprise. We could have another storyboard focused on regional performance, another storyboard that gets down to the very granular, detailed views of any certain products or performance at a rep level, depending upon the use case. Yet there are shared data elements across each of these different storyboards. And what the machine will do here is again leverage the information that we generated at Inference, and having that inherent knowledge of what characteristics are present within the data and where it's being leveraged and positioned and shared within ClearStory. This allows us to then automatically suggest to these business users that if we click on a certain visualization within our storyboard, that we can explore more connected insights across any different other ecosystems, other storyboards that have then shared data elements. So you can more cleanly represent different levels of analyses for different groups of users and have a streamlined delivery that is not overly descriptive at one level, but is then not too highly summarized at another. And they exist in their separate areas, and we can navigate between the two. So let's really get into it now. So the goal here of this next portion of the webinar, where we're going to get hands-on with the solution, is to break it into 3 different areas where we're going to talk about the data in itself and the act of harmonizing the data. We're then going to build some views on a couple data sets that have been harmonized together. We're going to share that information back out to the storyboards, and spend a little bit of time in a built-out storyboard experience where we can explore that concept of navigation, experience that commenting and contextual collaboration element that we have with different users in these different ecosystems. So give me a second here, and I'll switch over to the product itself. All right. So here we have ClearStory loaded in a browser. Something to point out that there's no additional overhead from an IT perspective with ClearStory. It's a browser-loaded application. Any modern browser, simply securely log in, point your browser to app.clearstory data, at which point then your own user permissions, rights and roles, etc., that governance model I spoke of at the onset takes hold. And what do I mean by that? So we have several different classes of users. Today, I'll be exploring this ecosystem through our more power user, our data steward profile, but I'll call out a couple of different areas where the experience will change. And one of those experiences specific to a data steward is the ability to create a data source connection. This is where we're connecting into our enterprise environments. It's that IT permitted mindset where not everyone is a data steward, but a subset of individuals that have the priority or the reason and the permission from IT to be making these connections are defining and then owning this relationship of that connection and the data ingest into ClearStory. Cloud-based, behind the firewall, whether it's legacy relational databases, newer Hadoop data lakes, or even any API connections. We also offer an SDK for building out novel connections to any APIs, any blob stores, etc. And now the second class of user, right beyond that data steward, is one we'll term a story author. Think of the analyst persona, someone that has one foot in the data, another foot in the business's needs, and occasionally, beyond working with any of the data sources that a data steward has shared with them inside of ClearStory, they have a need to be uploading a flat file. So we're going to allow for that user, that analyst, that they've been emailed some data from another resource within the business, or they simply they put together a forecast sheet on in Excel, and they've exported that and want to look at that against the revenue figures or the call values coming out of a Salesforce or some other tracking tool from the enterprise. So let's encourage people to bring things together into the environment. And then the last user profile that we'll touch on when we get to the storyboard piece is, strictly speaking, a viewer profile. So coming back to the process here of now kind of working with some data, starting to harmonize it, the experience now, whether we're a data steward or whether we're a story author, is one that is going to be very similar, where we start to create a story, right? We're going to be prompted to add some data into this environment. Now, this is running out, checking all the permissions of my particular user and saying, here are all the data sets that you have access to. Now, pick which one we want to start with. So I'm going to start working with a point of sale data set that we have here. And as I go and add this into the story, we're then going to immediately start to visualize this, right? Instead of giving you a blank screen or just a scripted prompt, we're going to try to get you thinking about what type of data is present, exists within this. We see here, right, we have some time course data, a couple years worth of data, and we see the relevant visualizations across the top. We want to immediately get you hands-on and working with something in the data set here. So I'm going to first give my story a title here. So this is a POS exploration. And now, what do we want to start to understand about this data, right? We have multiple different data fields that we can pull from this data set. There's a lot of attributes to describe the data, a couple different fields around margin, around sales amount, etc. And so we can start to track things such as our sales trend over time. And let's look at this break it down by month. Some kind of visual presentation controls around describing, creating an appealing visualization for us to look at here, and intuitive controls such as filtering over time. So let's actually continue to break this down. I want to go beyond the month level and get a little more granular understanding of a weekly sales trend. And this is one that now, along this time course trend underneath my visualization, I can use really intuitive, simple operations such as performing a filter right on this data. And there's a lot of POS data in here, right? This is all a live in-memory process that is being handled in our scaled out architecture. And now that this filter has been defined, if I wanted to go adjust this, I can certainly go and manually override some of those values that I've selected. But what I'm going to start to do is actually build out a little comment trail of my work in this process. So looking at our sales trend over time, specifically October through Jan, across 2015, 2016. And this comment thread that we'll build out, you're going to see here in a moment how it really records kind of a lot of the actions that we're driving here. So now as I walk through the data and look at it with any different particular description, this is a on-the-fly, right, interactive exploration of these particular data elements that we're looking at. And it's not one where we have to go back and fetch a different script to pull in different data, right? We can really bring in the broad, deep, granular context of all of our data elements and host them all in this environment, because since it does operate at scale, we don't have to make predefined decisions around sizing down the data so it cleanly fits into a narrow enough confines to sit inside of the server operation that is dedicated and specified for a particular use case. Well, if we want more data, maybe that's not a big enough box. So here, the cloud-based approach of our infrastructure is growing to meet these needs, so we can really work with this granular data. So breaking out here, this sales trend by division, and instead of just working with a single data set here, what I'm going to start to do here is leverage the power of harmonization in the fact that we can now easily fetch any other data sets that have been given to us. So as I go to harmonize any new additional data sets into this story here, we're now starting to show up some of that scoring that we talked about earlier in the inference process, driven by the inference process. So it's a 0 through 10 order of magnitude indication as to the potential likelihood that there's some overlap, there's some shared characteristics across the different data sets. And as we then search down for a particular data set of interest, we have, for example, I have some SAP margin data that we can pull in. And we see that we have a strong match across our UPC code characteristic. And as I go to pull that data set in, we're going to get a success message around the fact that we've successfully harmonized and incorporated both data sets. And then we continue to work to build out these descriptive views of what we're trying to see. So what I want to actually build out is an understanding of what are our kind of some top SKUs by performance, looking at sales, gross margin, total margin, etc. And so to do that, I'm going to switch to a bar chart visualization, and I'm going to toggle some of these story controls on the left side to define the particular view that I want to see. Now, let's move our bar chart around here, and I'm going to add in some figures. So we have our total sales, and we have then the SAP margin information that we're going to pull in from our other data set here that we've just harmonized. And then I also want to pull in and generate a gross margin characteristic. Now, the harmonization here, let's just revisit this for a second. So the harmonization here across our UPC field, we can even go in and edit exactly this relationship. So on what particular field are we joining on, as well as how is this particular harmonization decision being structured. So when we know that there is a specific business logic that we need to apply, we can declare that, save this, right? And then our entire story grows to take shape for the consideration of how the data is being treated in that particular circumstance. So now as we're looking at our sales and margin, But we don't want to be looking at it by week. We want to actually look at it by our UPCs. And then we want to calculate this gross margin field. So for our purposes today, we're going to look at a gross margin of sales amount times this margin field. And working across these two different data sets, I'm going to grab my sales amount and then my margin from our SAP data, build out this particular, these three different views here, and then we're going to start to place them all on the same graph. And move my margin down the other side. I'm going to stack or put these bars side by side, and then I'm going to leverage the visualization here of looking at the particular fields on a dual axis chart, like so. So here, now we have total sales, we have our gross margin, sales times margin, and then our total margin being called out. And we've got a little show labels here so that we can see a few of these points called out. So now and then looking at this particular view, right, as we arrive at this understanding, we want to share this out to a particular audience, we start to then leverage our storyboard mechanism. So as we want to share this out to an audience, we'll publish this to a storyboard. There's a list of storyboards that we have access to, and we'll share this out. We'll select a storyboard, or perhaps we're defining a new storyboard, and this is a workflow process that we're working towards. And we'll add this to our particular storyboard, and then take a look at this storyboard experience here. So that new view that we just created, it's being added to the end of my storyboard down here. And we can then see that in this storyboard framework here now, communicating a lot of different insights. Now, we could have any number of different storyboards, different use cases. Here's an insurance claim use case, right? We have working with sensor data in kind of these big data landscapes with data that a lot of complicated business logic to separate the different sensor details to rationalize that. But back to our use case here. The storyboard that we're looking at, this is really meant to be this high level overall summary of the business. So what is selling and where? What are our top UPCs? And looking at things like some box plot ranges of the average prices for these particular UPCs. And in this experience here, you'll notice I've gone from the high level summary into a focused presentation of individual frames of our storyboard. If I remove the comment panel, we can handle that presentation right on the live updating data on these storyboards. We're not having to create a static PowerPoint to go have a conversation with any of our internal customers or those external audiences, but rather we can just talk about what it is that we see right here. And as that conversation develops with these users and these stakeholders, we can then leverage the comment panel to really have that context around what is that they were seeing. So users come in, they've made some comments that we're seeing some particular SKU outperform in a certain particular market. We click on this view, we're brought to that view that user is seeing. Now, what had that user done? They've gone in and they'd applied a filter to focus in on this particular city market store brand. And then this is the view that they saw. Now, also keep in mind that this captures historical change of data. So if the data has since updated, since this comment has been made, we will move back in time and we still get to see that specific view that user had made. Now, as that power user or the analyst or the curator of this environment, I can go in and I can give that user a particular reply to their question. And maybe it's not, strictly speaking, just a straightforward reply in the threaded response of this comment here. But it's also one where this question might have spawned a new thought process, or good question. We didn't think of that previously. How can we go and investigate that? This is where now by permission, subject to a governance model, users that have that permission are able to then click continue analysis. As we click continue analysis, we're actually going to now round trip ourselves back into the story environment where this particular view that we were created or we're looking at in our storyboard is now represented back out in the story interface, where I can add any new data sets to this particular environment. I can adjust the visualization, the presentation of this information. I can redefine any of the maths and measures. You know, and if it's not just a straightforward calculation, some of those often frequently accessed ones, there's an entire operator reference guide for all of the advanced expression building that you might need to achieve to really make sure that we get to those specific insights. Now, in the act of responding to any of these particular users, right, we're able to round trip, right? We're able to quickly get those new insights back into the story environment. We're not subject to the limitations of a strict schema in that we can continue to harmonize new data sets. Yet we still want to have a better understanding of this end user experience when they're at the storyboard, of how they can communicate all this information or absorb all this information that we've presented for them and curated for them. So they very well might be going in and performing some filtering of the entire dashboard or storyboard for their own purposes, and being able to let the end user go in and say, well, no, I don't want to filter that value. I'm going to change this particular filter. But I earlier talked about this idea of the connected kind of smart exploration of these storyboards. And it's one where, because ClearStory is aware of all of the elements within the data fields, the actual values themselves, not just the headers, we're then able to continue to drive intelligence around how the data is being used and represented inside of the platform. As I click Explore Insights here, I'm clicking on an aspect of this visualization. I now click Explore Insights, and I get a list of other storyboards and other visualizations that have been created and are being shared in a different package, in a different storyboard, because one of this storyboard is focused on store division instead of the overall company performance. The storyboard here focused on that commodity down to that UPC, and then being able to have, say, a very detailed breakout level storyboard. So you would curate these different storyboards based upon the different needs of each level of the analyses, and then we'll navigate from one to the next while assuming the focus of this particular East region that I've clicked on. As we navigate to the store division performance storyboard now, we're being shown all the information on this storyboard through the lens of the particular region associated with East. And this is a process that continues kind of ad hominem across any particular set of insights that can be connected, and is one that requires no scripting, no coding to set up. So the machine is automatically suggesting these connections and does not require any input from the end user as to how these storyboards should be set up together. So I want to summarize a lot of what we've seen here today. If we kind of go back into the particular story itself and this ability to drive the presentation of the information that we're looking at, the ability to harmonize multiple data sets together, have that intelligence around what information is shared across these particular data sets, and what is that particular characteristic that we might join on, and the fact that there might be multiple. Being able to have explicit control over the method of those different data sets and being able to edit the particular harmonization strategy, to then sharing this information out to our storyboard audiences, where they're then communicating and collaborating amongst themselves in between the consumer and the curator of these different insights, is one that really streamlines the entire process in delivery of these expectations, these insights, and the sharing of that. So I was, someone was asking a question here and talking about the user access. So great question. So just want to quickly revisit some of the user access controls. So every different asset within the ClearStory environment is one that is subject to a permission model, where we have then different levels of access that we can grant in the asset and across the asset. So each particular asset, whether that is a data set, whether that is a story, whether that is a storyboard, can then be granted either access to, say, a particular group of individuals or specific individuals. And then we decide, do they receive a manager level or a participant level? We want to eliminate single points of failure. When you originally create something, you can have fellow managers that could also handle curation aspects, could also handle permissioning aspects of things, but then define groups of users that are simply participants. So they can work with these assets, but they can't necessarily alter some of the permissions around them. They can't delete them, right? They can't go and change what users are accessing them, but they can interact with them. And in this, it is tiered then granularly across all of the different assets within ClearStory, such that you can have very explicit control that only certain groups of users are permitted into each of these different resources. We've got another question here. Users are, when thinking about data sets and working with some of the data preparation tasks. So we showed you some of the visualization aspects of working with data. There's also a lot of hands-on transformation preparation tasks that are achieved, and a lot of times it's the redefinition of a data set for then explicit purpose. If we need to build out an aggregate level of data, we can do so. So here, this is a view where we're looking at a very detailed representation, kind of down to that particular scan code, that UPC code. But if we wanted to back this up to a certain higher level understanding of things, where we can build out the aggregate, say, at a store level, and then have, say, our total margins across that higher level understanding or higher level aggregation, and then save all of this work as a derived data set. Now, the act of saving as a derived data set is one that takes into account the fact that we have data coming from 1, 2, 3 different data sets, and then the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 particular fields that we've defined should be involved in this. Now, these particular fields can be calculations. They can be just a straight pull of a particular attribute or a particular field, and they can handle very complex calculations as well. Now, after having created that derived data set, we'll then additionally subsequently share that derived data set back to pools of users. So in this way, we're really managing the flow of data between power users, between more analyst users that aren't building derived data sets, but are working with them to drive the visual presentation and information delivery. And it is how we'll automate then those pipelines, because a derived data set is one that is updated whenever the source of that particular data set is updated. And that entire management experience is one that is defined for any particular data set at its own data set details page. So every data set has its own management interface here, where we can define, are we appending or are we replacing new data? We can define, again, those audiences that are accessing this particular data set. And then we even get to see an overview of how the data is being utilized within the system. So as this owner of a data set, we can have some interaction with the other folks that are working with these different the data sets for their own analyses. We can check to see if it's being used appropriately. And then we're also surfacing up a lot of information around the characteristics within these data sets to be able to cleanly have a quick understanding of what it is that we're trying to work with. And then there's even some management functionalities of defining that there are some certain calculated fields that we want to pre-calculate. We don't want users to be able to manipulate these. So these fields here as custom attributes are defined by an owner of a data set, such that then an end user can interact with that. So there's a lot of control that can be expressed here within the solution, and really putting the data into the right state and then putting it into the right user's hands to unlock them. We do have a few more questions coming in. I want to give everyone some fair time, and I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them in the allotted time. So I think we'll take some of these offline and kind of get back to you specifically. But otherwise, I wanted to thank you for your time today, and really, let you know that we want to be here, right? We want to work with you, and be able to work on a use case potentially. So, reach out to us. We would love to start that conversation, and whether that's through a trial, whether that's a bespoke demo, kind of specific to your use case, your needs. A couple different ways to get a hold of us here. You can visit us at our website and sign up for the trial or demo there, or just send us an email at the contact us email address. We'd love to strike up a conversation here and learn a little bit about your business and potentially how ClearStory can be brought to bear to work with you here. And I'll leave you with just a summary slide here of some of those key capabilities that are truly unique to ClearStory, unique to the automations being brought to bear, unique to the scale at which we can operate, and really unlocking a lot of power back into those business users, because they're not so mired in the tedious details, but rather are exploring data. They're doing this quickly, and they're doing it at the scale that they need to have it happen. So thank you for your time today.